I was hunched over my desk, the soft hum of my laptop filling the quiet of my home office. The morning sun had just begun to spill across the beige walls, catching the edge of a stack of files I hadn't had the time to sort through. My coffee had gone cold, forgotten, as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the emails waiting for my attention. Then the phone rang. I froze, my hand hovering midair as I recognized the number, unknown hospital number. My chest tightened almost immediately. After all these years, why now? For a moment, I hesitated, half expecting it to be a wrong number, a routine check-in that didn't concern me. But the sense of unease settled like a weight I hadn't felt in years. Memories surged, the sterile white of the hospital room, the faint antiseptic smell, the nurse's hurried movements, the cold way the doctor delivered news that had shattered me. I could still remember gripping that hospital gown, staring down at the empty bassinet, feeling my heart twist into knots I hadn't fully untangled. 5 years ago, they told me my baby didn't make it, claimed genetic complications. I'd blamed myself, my body, my choices. I'd blamed everything except the system that should have protected us. I finally pressed the green button, my thumb trembling slightly. Hello? My voice was steady, more than I felt inside. The nurse's voice came through, polite but urgent. Ms. Harper? This is Dr. Klein from St. Jude's Hospital. We have security footage regarding your baby. My stomach dropped, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Security footage? My mind raced through every possible scenario. Mistake? Malpractice? Could I have been misled all this time? The words echoed in my ears. They didn't just say there was a mistake, they said my baby didn't die from genetics. The weight of disbelief hit me first, twisting into relief, then anger, then confusion. How had no one told me? How had we lived these 5 years believing something untrue? My hands clenched into fists under the desk, nails biting into palms, trying to ground myself. The nurse continued, her words precise, almost clinical. We understand this is unexpected. We want to give you the opportunity to review the footage and discuss next steps. I sank back into my chair, staring at the phone as if it could somehow offer answers by itself. My mind shifted rapidly, notes to take, people to contact, legal advice to seek. I grabbed a pen, my notebook already open, and started jotting down questions. Who else was aware? Was this deliberate? Could this change everything in my family? In my life? The realization hit hard, the footage could expose mistakes, negligence, maybe even intentional wrongdoing. The kind of revelation that could fracture relationships, upend trust, and force confrontations I wasn't sure I was ready for. As the call ended abruptly, leaving more questions than answers, I sat frozen, the line dead, my pulse hammering in my ears. I stared at the phone, gripping it as though holding on to it could tether me to reality. Everything I thought I knew about those first unbearable days came crashing back, colliding with the possibility that it hadn't happened as I'd been told. The world felt unsteady, the air thick with anticipation, fear, and an urgent need for answers. The morning light no longer seemed warm, it felt sharp, exposing every shadow of doubt I had carried silently for years. I placed the phone down carefully, as if even the surface could betray secrets. My mind began its relentless mapping, who to call first, how to approach this without panic, what questions could not be left unasked. I could feel the first stirrings of determination, a slow burn that sharpened my focus. If something had been hidden, if there had been deception or neglect, I would confront it. I would uncover the truth. But for now, all I could do was sit with the shock, letting the implications settle into every nerve, every thought, knowing that nothing about the life I had built since that day would ever feel the same again. I paced back and forth in my home office, the phone still warm in my hand from the earlier call. Every ring and vibration from my device seemed amplified, echoing the whirlwind of thoughts in my mind. 5 years of certainty, of living with a grief I thought I understood, now felt like a fragile facade ready to crumble. Could the hospital truly be telling me the truth after all this time? Of anxiety and resolve. The corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic, the sound of distant paging systems blending with the soft hum of fluorescent lights. I moved through the records room methodically, my eyes scanning files, my mind aligning dates and details. When I finally saw the security footage, a jolt of disbelief washed over me. Every familiar face, every familiar moment, was there, and yet the narrative I had been given 5 years ago did not match. My hands trembled as I compared notes, noting subtle differences, a nurse's interaction that suggested delay, a procedure that had been recorded differently than I remembered, timelines that did not coincide. Outrage bubbled beneath my calm exterior. How could they have let this happen? And why now? I pulled together printed documents, labeling folders with meticulous care, my mind strategizing the next moves. Who would need to see this first? How could I protect the truth while preparing for the inevitable confrontations? My resolve solidified, the shock and anger became a steady current driving my actions. Every observation, every note, every question I penned was a step toward reclaiming the story that had been taken from me. The path forward was clear, even if fraught with uncertainty. As I prepared to leave, a hospital staff member appeared, questioning my access to the records. My pulse spiked, but I refused to step back. I met their gaze evenly, asserting my right to review the information, aware that hesitation could cost me time, evidence, and control. Their skeptical look only reinforced my determination. I would not be deterred. The files, the footage, and the truths hidden within them would not remain buried any longer. I spent the morning poring over the hospital records again, tracing dates, noting inconsistencies, and mentally rehearsing how I would confront the administrators. My fingers tapped nervously against the desk, shifting papers from one pile to another, while I tried to steady my breath. Anxiety mingled with determination, a tight coil of energy that propelled me forward. Each discrepancy I uncovered, from misdated forms to missing signatures, felt like a small victory, proof that my intuition hadn't betrayed me. One minor inconsistency stood out, almost trivial, yet it strengthened my case and fueled my resolve. I reminded myself that clarity and assertiveness were my tools. I needed to be precise, direct, and unwavering. By late afternoon, I walked into the hospital administrative office, the sterile atmosphere pressing down on me. I kept my voice measured but firm as I asked about the missing documentation and discrepancies I had found. The administrator's responses were polite, yet defensive, a careful dance of evasion and testing. My frustration rose with each vague answer, but I maintained my composure, noting every hesitation, every subtle cue that hinted at information being withheld. I realized, almost with a jolt, that some of the oversight might have been intentional, a truth hinted at inadvertently in their carefully chosen words. My mind cataloged it all, forming the threads I would pull together later. After the meeting, I stepped into the nearby coffee shop, the warmth of the sunlit interior a stark contrast to the tension still lingering in my chest. I sipped my drink slowly, letting the conversation replay in my mind, and drew parallels to my childhood experiences of being overlooked and dismissed. Patterns emerged, authority challenged, questions unasked, truths buried. I opened my notebook, highlighting critical sections, planning my next moves, and reinforcing the strategy that had begun to crystallize. Calm resolve settled over me, a mental fortification preparing me for the next escalation. Back in my home office, documents spread across the table, I contacted former colleagues, requesting any additional records or confirmation of events from 5 years ago. Cross-referencing hospital footage, reviewing memos, and checking dates, I felt anticipation build alongside controlled anger. Every inconsistency became undeniable, every piece of corroborating evidence a sharpened tool in my arsenal. My pulse raced with purpose, and I knew I had the leverage needed for the next confrontation. I have what I need, I thought, a cold clarity taking hold, now it's a matter of timing. Then the unexpected happened. A message blinked on my phone, warning me to stop digging or face consequences. My stomach tightened, the words cutting through the careful plan I had built. Trust wavered, uncertainty settled in, yet the fire inside me refused to be quenched. I met the challenge with mental sharpness, absorbing the warning without hesitation, preparing to move forward no matter the risk. I realized that uncovering the truth would demand courage, strategy, and an unwavering hand. Nothing would stop me from finding answers, no matter how much pressure or intimidation came my way. The evening settled in quietly, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across my home office. I spread the newly obtained documents across my desk, laptop open beside me, and studied every detail with a meticulous eye. Security footage timestamps, medical notes, and staff memos formed a tangled web of inconsistencies that no honest mistake could explain. My mind raced as I traced patterns, connecting prior interactions with hospital staff to these revelations. Shock and disbelief swirled within me, yet I forced a calm, analytical perspective. As the pieces fell into place, a sense of vindication took hold, but it was tinged with the bitter awareness that this was not merely negligence, it had the hallmarks of a deliberate cover-up. Organizing the evidence into a clear timeline, I highlighted each discrepancy, noting who had been present and what decisions had been made. Thoughts of possible allies crossed my mind, former colleagues who still respected me, family members who would back my pursuit of truth. Carefully, I planned the approach for confronting key figures, formulating questions and statements with precision. The simmering frustration beneath my cautious optimism fueled a strategic focus, compelling me to ensure no detail went unexamined. I mapped cross-references on my laptop, marked documents in bold colors, and rehearsed scenarios silently, anticipating every possible reaction. Among the files, I discovered a witness who could corroborate my suspicions, a revelation that made my pulse quicken and my determination sharpen. Later, I met with a lower-level staff member under the guise of casual inquiry. I asked questions that seemed innocuous but were calculated to gauge truthfulness. The employee fidgeted, voice uneven, revealing more than intended in nervous hesitation. Every slight evasive maneuver, every glance away, was logged mentally, parsed for hidden intentions. I maintained calm, asserting control over the conversation, quietly piecing together information that could later confront those in higher authority. My internal dialogue replayed every subtle slip, each seemingly trivial detail potentially pivotal in unraveling the broader deception. Back at my office, I reflected on the stakes personally invested in this discovery. Memories of being overlooked and dismissed during my childhood merged with the injustice I now faced, reinforcing a resolve that had grown stronger with each revelation. I translated pain into actionable intelligence, considering not just personal vindication but the wider implications for others who had been affected. My journal, photographs, and correspondence became visual anchors, reminders of the human impact behind the bureaucratic errors and intentional misdirections. I felt a quiet empathy mingled with a hardened resolve. This was no longer about uncovering mistakes, it was about restoring integrity and accountability. As twilight deepened, an unexpected email arrived from an insider, cryptic yet urgent. I read it twice, the gravity of its contents sinking in slowly. Any wrong move now could jeopardize months of careful investigation and potentially change everything. My heart raced, yet my mind stayed clear, weighing options, analyzing risk, and planning a measured but decisive course of action. The shadows outside thickened, mirroring the tense anticipation inside me. The path forward was illuminated by evidence and insight, but fraught with peril, a delicate balance between action and caution, one misstep away from chaos. I took a deep breath, letting the late afternoon sun filter through the blinds onto the stacks of documents in front of me. Each folder was meticulously organized, a tangible representation of months of investigation. I reviewed every note, cross-referenced security footage timelines, and mentally rehearsed the questions I would pose. My heart carried a simmering anger, not just for the deception I was uncovering but for the years of subtle dismissals and overlooked truths. I noticed something that made my chest tighten, a detail implicating an unexpected family member who may have unknowingly played a part in the cover-up. The realization stirred a cocktail of frustration and determination. This confrontation was no longer just about the hospital, it reached into the very fabric of my personal life. Arriving at the hospital, the sterile smell of disinfectant and the low hum of office machinery greeted me. I was led into a meeting room where the administrator and senior staff were already seated. I presented my findings, calm yet firm, outlining the discrepancies in the records with precise clarity. I noticed their subtle shifts in posture, fleeting glances exchanged, small betrayals that hinted at the cracks in their narrative. As I probed, the administrator's demeanor faltered, an inadvertent admission of partial responsibility slipping through. My mind raced, cataloging every nuance, knowing this moment provided leverage, a foothold to push for deeper truths. I remained composed, and my stomach dropped. A new piece of evidence, or perhaps a witness, had emerged, one that could unravel deeper layers of the conspiracy I was uncovering. My pulse quickened as I read and reread the text, realizing that every second mattered. The line between action and caution blurred, each choice holding the power to change the outcome drastically. The room seemed to grow colder, shadows stretching across the floor as the tension coiled tightly in my chest. I knew the next move would be pivotal, requiring the full measure of focus, strategy, and courage I could summon. The hidden lies were closer to being exposed, and the coming confrontation would test everything I had prepared for. The living room felt smaller than usual, suffused with the late afternoon light that caught on the polished surfaces and cast long shadows. My family lingered on the edges of conversation, their words careful, almost clipped, as if measuring how much truth they could tolerate. I attempted to explain my intentions, to articulate the need for transparency, but met only subtle resistance, eye rolls, sighs, and the quiet undercurrent of sarcasm that spoke louder than words. Memories of being dismissed in the past surged, years when my concerns were minimized, my intelligence doubted, but I stayed grounded, channeling frustration into resolve. Every gesture, every glance was noted, a slightly raised eyebrow, a hand brushing past a document too casually. And then it hit me, someone I trusted had sided unknowingly against me, a betrayal that made the stakes sharper and my determination more focused. Later, in the cool confines of the legal office, I spread the evidence before counsel, each piece a building block of a story that demanded scrutiny. My documents, highlighted emails, and security footage stills formed a web of undeniable discrepancies. As the lawyer's eyes moved over the files, a shift occurred. She discovered a previously hidden document that opened a new avenue I hadn't anticipated. My pulse quickened with a mixture of controlled excitement and strategic calculation. This was the moment where preparation met opportunity, and I could feel my own competence solidifying, my intelligence steering the course forward. The room hummed with the quiet tension of possibility, the kind that demands careful timing and unwavering focus. Back home, I mapped out each next move. Timing was crucial. I weighed personal, familial, and social consequences, aligning them with a contingency plan should my initial approach falter. My internal dialogue was meticulous, running through the weaknesses of others, the likely reactions, the domino effect of each action. Every decision I considered carried the weight of potential change, not just in exposing wrongdoing but in reshaping how I would assert my place in the face of deception. There was no room for hesitation. The clarity of my intent burned steadily as I reviewed each scenario, mentally preparing for the confrontation to come. When the moment arrived, the confrontation escalated. Family members and hospital staff gathered in a carefully arranged setting, the evidence arrayed methodically before them. I spoke with calm authority, juxtaposed with the moral pressure of undeniable facts. Discrepancies were pointed out, responses noted, and the room shifted under the weight of truth I wielded. Gestures, document presentations, and digital evidence displays reinforced my position. Even as tension surged, I maintained control, every word measured, every expression purposeful. The stakes were evident, acknowledgement was no longer optional, and the consequences of denial weighed heavily in the room. Then, my phone buzzed, slicing through the controlled atmosphere. An anonymous tip appeared, revealing a critical piece of information that could dramatically alter the trajectory of this confrontation. My heart skipped as I absorbed the content, knowing that any immediate action or delay would significantly affect the power balance. The suspense was sharp, a taut line stretching between risk and resolution. I felt the familiar blend of fear, determination, and strategic focus tighten around me. Every second now carried weight, and the next steps demanded the full measure of intelligence, poise, and courage I could summon. The ground I stood on was unshakable, but the path ahead promised both revelation and danger in equal measure. Sitting in my private office, the hum of the city outside felt distant, almost irrelevant, compared to the storm of thoughts spinning in my mind. I revisited every confrontation from the past weeks, dissecting the reactions of family and hospital staff with the precision of a strategist preparing for battle. Each hesitation, each defensive glance, each subtle attempt at deflection revealed weaknesses I could exploit. I breathed deeply, letting the frustration of years of being dismissed fuel a sense of empowerment I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. The quiet determination that had simmered beneath the surface finally coalesced into something tangible, a clear, deliberate focus on reclaiming control, not with anger, but with calculated authority. Over the next hours, I reached out to allies I trusted implicitly, friends who understood both the stakes and the moral compass guiding me, former colleagues whose insights could corroborate evidence, and legal contacts who could help navigate the complexities ahead. In confidential conversations, I pieced together supplemental emails, medical reports, and witness statements that had been overlooked or dismissed. Every new piece of information strengthened my position, and when I discovered testimony previously buried in the chaos of bureaucracy, my confidence surged. I began organizing digital files and scheduling secure meetings, all the while visualizing how to present the evidence in a way that would command attention without compromising integrity or morality. Strategizing the confrontation became a meticulous exercise in timing, precision, and controlled exposure. I mapped out every step, which pieces of evidence to reveal first, how to sequence interactions with hospital staff and family members, and the optimal moments for public acknowledgement if necessary. The emotional undertone was calm but firm, there was no room for impulsivity. Every word, every gesture had to reinforce credibility and command respect. My mind moved like a chessboard, calculating moves several steps ahead, anticipating countermoves, and preparing contingencies. I felt a quiet, steady power, the kind that comes not from domination, but from clarity, intelligence, and control. The first test of my strategy came sooner than expected. In a controlled discussion with family members, I introduced subtle evidence that prompted hesitation and fleeting glances of guilt in those who had underestimated me. Small concessions emerged almost effortlessly, and for the first time, I sensed the dynamic shifting. Confidence replaced anxiety, and the satisfaction of seeing strategy meet reality reinforced the certainty that my approach was working. Then, in a moment I hadn't anticipated, an antagonist made an unforced error, revealing a vulnerability that would provide leverage in the upcoming, more significant confrontation. It was a subtle crack in the facade, but enough to energize me, sharpening my focus for what was to come. Just as I began to consolidate these victories, a message arrived that made my hand tremble slightly. The contents suggested an urgent opportunity, or perhaps a hidden challenge, that required immediate attention. My mind raced, weighing the risk of moving too quickly against the potential cost of delay. Every element of the plan now demanded scrutiny, every decision carried amplified consequences. I felt the pulse of anticipation tighten around me, a mixture of excitement and caution, knowing that the next step could change everything. My power wasn't just in the evidence I had collected, it was in my clarity, my preparation, and the unwavering resolve to act decisively when the moment demanded it. I was no longer reacting, I was orchestrating the path forward, fully aware of the stakes and ready to turn the tide in my favor. The hospital boardroom was colder than I expected, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the polished table. I stepped inside, files clutched tightly, USB drives in hand, and scanned the room. Family members sat stiffly, eyes flicking toward the hospital administrators with barely concealed tension. Every subtle glance, every twitch of a jaw, spoke volumes about the anticipation hanging thick in the air. I took a steadying breath, mentally reviewing the sequence of evidence I would present, ensuring that each point built logically, leaving no room for evasion. The antagonists had no idea the depth of the documentation I had brought, the emails, the security footage, the meticulously annotated timelines that would expose the truth beyond argument. I could feel my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a controlled intensity that sharpened my focus. I opened the meeting with a calm, firm statement that immediately commanded attention. My voice was steady, each word deliberate, setting the tone for what would follow. I presented the initial evidence, framing the narrative without letting emotion override authority. Board members and family shifted in their seats, micro-expressions betraying surprise, uncertainty, and defensiveness. As I moved through the documents, highlighting inconsistencies and pointing out contradictions, I watched the room adjust. Each carefully selected detail built the framework for the revelations I was about to unveil. My confidence was rooted not in arrogance, but in meticulous preparation, and I felt the atmosphere change as credibility leaned in my favor. Then came the turning point. I revealed the previously concealed security footage. The video showed events that directly contradicted the story I had been told 5 years ago, confirming the mismanagement and cover-ups regarding my child's supposed genetic complications. Gasps echoed around the room, and family members struggled to form words. Administrators attempted to downplay the significance, but the contradictions were undeniable. I guided attention calmly, highlighting specific timestamps and sequences, leaving no room for dispute. Every face in the room registered the weight of truth, and I maintained control, ensuring that the narrative I presented was not lost amidst chaos. Validation surged through me, tempered by the awareness of how high the stakes remained. Desperation crept in from the antagonists. One tried to discredit the footage, another attempted to muddy the narrative with incomplete documents. But I was ready. Legal documentation, cross-referenced medical notes, and corroborating witness statements were at my fingertips. Each attempt to counter my position faltered against the evidence laid out clearly, systematically, and convincingly. Board members and family members alike began to shift, their trust wavering, the balance of power tilting unmistakably toward me. My heart raced, but my demeanor remained composed, a mix of triumph and strategic focus. Every move reinforced not only the truth but my authority over the situation. As the meeting concluded, I stood, gathering my materials while scanning the room. Partial victory was mine, the evidence had spoken, the inconsistencies had been laid bare, and the initial acknowledgement of wrongdoing was on record. Yet I knew this was only the beginning. The remaining antagonists, those who had remained silent or who had tried to manipulate events behind the scenes, would not accept defeat quietly. The tension of the fallout pressed against my awareness, and I felt the suspense coil tight around the next phase of action. Every detail I had revealed tonight had shifted the dynamic, but the ultimate resolution, the full reckoning, still awaited. I left the boardroom with my head held high, knowing that the truth was finally visible, and the path forward demanded vigilance and calculated decisiveness. The evening settled over Houston as I returned home, a quiet relief mingling with the lingering tension from the confrontation at the hospital. The weight of weeks of investigation, planning, and confrontation began to lift, yet my mind raced, cataloging every reaction I had witnessed, the subtle shifts in family members' expressions, the board members' uneasy silence, the antagonist's strained composure. Each face told a story of recognition, acknowledgement, and, in some cases, fear of exposure. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, recalling past betrayals and the neglect that had shaped my cautious resolve. The journey from private anguish to public assertion had been exhausting, but now clarity and a sense of justice grounded me. I reviewed my notes once more, ensuring that the evidence trail was airtight, ready for the final steps needed to secure closure. By the time I convened with my legal advisors and a few trusted allies, I felt a sharp sense of control. Together, we reviewed every piece of documentation, confirming that the antagonist could no longer manipulate the narrative without facing inevitable exposure. Calmly and strategically, I coordinated final plans for disclosure, ensuring that the truth would stand unassailable. Then came the unexpected twist. A previously concealed document surfaced, an admission that could not be ignored. It validated all my efforts, cementing the outcome in my favor. Witnessing the confidence and deference in my team, I recognized the depth of my personal growth, the shift from reactive frustration to proactive, empowered leadership. The weight of the past had been transformed into decisive authority. Later, I gathered with supportive family and friends, those who had stood by me through every step. Their expressions reflected relief, pride, and the subtle gratitude of having remained steadfast. Minor confrontations with remaining antagonists surfaced, their last-minute manipulations feeble against the foundation of truth I had built. I met these with tact and calm resolve, letting experience guide my responses rather than emotion. Through this, I began to forgive, not to forget, but to release the grip of lingering anger. Symbolic gestures marked the moment, returning documents to rightful hands, sharing affirmations of support with allies, and quietly acknowledging the endurance that had carried me this far. The act of moving forward became tangible, deliberate, and quietly celebratory. The community responded as the story unfolded. I clarified misconceptions, shared findings, and presented the validated evidence publicly, not for spectacle, but to restore integrity and understanding. Colleagues, neighbors, and professional contacts acknowledged the courage and intelligence demonstrated throughout the ordeal. Messages of support and admiration flowed in, affirming that perseverance and steadfast dedication to truth resonate deeply. This public acknowledgement reinforced the themes I had lived: justice, resilience, and self-worth, and highlighted the value of measured, informed action in confronting injustice. As night fell, I sat quietly in my home, reflecting on what had been achieved. The scars of the past remained, reminders of earlier trials and the lessons they carried. Yet, in their presence, I felt a renewed sense of possibility. The obstacles that once seemed insurmountable now appeared as markers of growth, the evidence of personal and strategic transformation. I considered the future, knowing there would be challenges, but feeling empowered by the clarity and competence I had cultivated. A subtle smile touched my lips as I thought, have you ever stood up for what's right when everyone doubted you? The question lingered, not just for me, but for anyone witnessing the journey from uncertainty and injustice to resolution and strength. And in that, I felt truly free to move forward, beyond the past.